The fluorescent lights of the Aeroflux office hummed with an oppressive frequency that vibrated straight into Donovan's teeth. At 55 years of age, he had spent a decade in this windowless cubicle, serving as a senior contracts analyst. He was the invisible scaffolding holding up the sky for men who did not even know his last name. He stared at his glowing monitor, his tired eyes tracing the sterile lines of an email from Jason in Human Resources. It was a rejection. The request for an $18,000 raise, a bump meticulously justified with reams of performance data, had been unceremoniously denied. The message read like a heartless corporate template. Donovan, unfortunately, your request got lost in the legal department. We simply do not have the budget approval at this time. We value your contributions, but we cannot accommodate an $18,000 increase in this fiscal year. Best regards, Jason. Lost in the legal department. The phrase was a jagged dagger. Donovan essentially was the legal department. He was the sole individual who actually read the complex contracts that the legal department blindly signed off on. Simon, the general counsel, was a man whose primary strategy consisted of playing golf with Oliver, the chief executive officer, and Gavin, the chief financial officer. That trifecta of arrogance ran Aeroflux like an exclusive country club. They were executives who treated Donovan like legacy hardware, reliable, unseen, and obsolete in their grand vision of market disruption. He pushed his ergonomic chair back, his chest tightening. $18,000. It was a microscopic fraction of the massive annual bonuses they happily paid themselves. Just last week, he overheard Gavin loudly bragging about purchasing a sprawling summer home. To those men, $18,000 was a negligible rounding error. To Donovan, it was the exact difference between retiring with a shred of dignity and working until he dropped dead at this very desk. Donovan stood up, ignoring the persistent ache in his lower back, and began to pace. The walls of his cubicle felt closer than usual, suffocating him with the physical manifestation of his stagnant career. While Oliver delivered flashy presentations on cloud infrastructure and Simon ignored liability, Donovan scoured the dense text of every major client agreement. He found the hidden loopholes. He made sure that when Aeroflux promised the moon, they did not accidentally sign away the Earth. His mind drifted back exactly 4 years. Aeroflux had miraculously landed the proverbial white whale of the tech industry, Apex Dynamics. It was a massive master services agreement that put Aeroflux on the map. The royalty structure they had negotiated was staggering. $90 million paid out over 7 years. The executives had immediately popped vintage champagne and taken all the credit, but it was Donovan who had spent 72 sleepless hours drafting the clauses that made the deal viable. He remembered the exact parameters. Apex Dynamics demanded absolute perfection, and Oliver had eagerly promised it. The critical uptime milestone was permanently set at an impossible 99.99%. If Aeroflux managed to process exactly 14 terabytes of data while flawlessly maintaining that impossible uptime, a special royalty kicker would be activated. The percentage was seemingly small, a mere 0.6%, but on a $90 million deal, 0.6% was a significant sum of money. Donovan stopped his pacing. A sudden memory sparked within his mind, an ember of realization glowing brightly in the cold ash of his disappointment. When he had frantically drafted the Apex Dynamics contract, he had carefully inserted a hidden fail-safe. It was a mechanism designed specifically to protect the analyst who ultimately certified the compliance data, which, by definition, was him. He had written it in such archaic legalese that he knew Symes would never possess the competence to understand it. Donovan walked out of his cubicle, moving with a determined purpose that rendered him invisible to the bustling junior associates. He passed the glass-walled conference rooms, where important men shouted at speakerphones. He made his way down the long gray corridor to the secure records department. The file room was a large vault where physical copies of all master agreements were mandated to be kept. Donovan only trusted paper. He swiped his worn security badge, and the heavy metal door clicked open. The air inside the vault was noticeably cool. Row upon row of heavy filing cabinets stood like silent sentinels. He walked purposefully to the aisle, labeled for the year of the Apex Dynamics signing. He pulled out the heavy drawer, his fingers trailing over the thick folders until he finally found it. The crisp label clearly read, Apex Dynamics, Master Services Agreement. He pulled the formidable binder from the drawer and carried it to a brightly lit reading table. He flipped it open, the premium pages crackling slightly. He turned directly to the crucial royalty and performance metrics clause. He ran his index finger slowly down the page. The clause explicitly stipulated that upon the verified processing of exactly 14 terabytes of data, while simultaneously meeting the rigorous 99.99% uptime milestone, a comprehensive performance audit was legally required, but that was not the true kicker. The real kicker was ingeniously buried in a convoluted subclause regarding the exact allocation of the 0.6% royalty bonus. The text stated that if the company achieved the milestone, the compliance officer who executed the audit was legally entitled to a special administrative execution fee. The mandatory payout was explicitly defined, $600,000. Donovan stared at the printed words, $600,000. It was an absolutely life-changing amount of money. It eclipsed the pathetic $18,000 raise he had just been denied. And the absolute best part? It was completely legally binding, signed in ink by Simon and authorized by Oliver. He sat back in the metal chair, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his weathered face. His raise had not been lost in the legal department. He no longer needed to ask for a raise. He just needed to trigger the clause. The commute back to his modest suburban home felt significantly longer than usual. Donovan gripped the steering wheel of his worn sedan, his knuckles pale. The memory of Oliver's smug, dismissive grin burned in his mind like acid. $18,000. That was all. He had respectfully requested that very morning. A simple, reasonable adjustment to reflect the massive load he had carried for the past 3 years. Instead, he received a condescending lecture on corporate belt-tightening from a man who casually expensed a luxury retreat to the Maldives. It was profoundly insulting. But as he finally pulled into his driveway, the anger crystallized into something entirely different, something cold, sharp, and purposeful. He headed straight down the hallway to his study. The house was completely silent, a deeply welcome contrast to the frantic neon nightmare of the Aeroflux corporate offices. Sitting at his oak desk, Donovan powered up his personal workstation. The soft glow of the monitors bathed his face in a harsh blue light as he logged into the secure virtual private network. As a 55-year-old senior contracts analyst, he possessed administrative clearance bordering on executive level, a necessity for auditing labyrinthine service agreements. He navigated swiftly through the complex security protocols until he reached the master administrative dashboard. This was the restricted repository where every single byte of data and microsecond of server activity was meticulously logged. His focus narrowed to the Apex Dynamics file. The Apex contract was the undisputed crown jewel of Aeroflux's corporate portfolio, guaranteeing a staggering $90 million over 7 years. But that payout was contingent on brutal, almost impossible performance metrics, leaving absolutely no room for error. Donovan opened the real-time analytics window, bypassing sanitized executive summaries designed for people like Oliver and Gavin. Going straight for the raw server logs, Donovan ran a custom query he had written specifically to track the Apex milestones. The server uptime for the past fiscal quarter was sitting at exactly 99.99%. He exhaled a slow breath. Against all odds, the engineering team had kept the system stable enough to hit the absolute peak of the service-level agreement, but uptime was only half the necessary equation. He adjusted his query parameters, pulling the data processing logs for the Apex account. The terminal finally spit out the irrefutable tally, 14 terabytes. They had processed exactly 14 terabytes of flawless, uninterrupted data, triggering the highest possible tier of the contractual obligations. Donovan leaned back, a dangerous smile spreading across his stoic face. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and uncapped his favorite fountain pen. According to the penalty clause, he had quietly drafted and buried deep within the 50-page technical addendum. A clause that Simon, the notoriously lazy general counsel, had blindly signed off on without reading. Donovan was entitled to a massive retroactive commission if these specific milestones were achieved, While he remained at his current compensation level, he methodically calculated the 0.6% retroactive commission against the gross deliverables. The nib of his fountain pen scratched rhythmically against the thick textured paper. He drew a heavy, dark, decisive circle around the final calculated number, $600,000. It was an absolutely staggering amount, dwarfing the pathetic $18,000 he had politely requested that morning. And the best part of it all was, it was entirely legal, perfectly binding, and utterly irreversible. The trap was set, but he desperately needed the right person to spring it. He couldn't just hand Jason and Human Resources a demand letter. They would bury him in endless litigation. He opened his contact directory and scrolled down to the letter P. Wallace Pierce, the formidable, utterly ruthless opposing counsel for Apex Dynamics. Wallace was a legendary legal shark, notorious for tearing apart vendor contracts at the slightest infraction. He was exactly the kind of cold-blooded monster Donovan needed. Donovan picked up his secured cell phone and dialed the direct line. It rang 3 times before a smooth baritone voice answered. Wallace Pierce speaking. Wallace, it's Donovan from Aeroflux. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening. Donovan. This is quite unexpected. To what do I owe the pleasure of a Friday night call from my favorite analyst? I'm calling about the Apex account, Donovan said. I was reviewing the recent performance metrics and the corresponding contractual addendums. I believe there is a specific structural element within the agreement that you and your legal team have entirely overlooked. Overlooked? The faint amusement instantly vanished from Wallace's voice. My legal team does not overlook things. Donovan, what exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything substantive over an unrecorded line, Donovan replied smoothly. But I can confidently tell you that the uptime and data processing milestones have just triggered a rather fascinating and highly lucrative cascade of financial obligations. Obligations that directly impact your client's leverage going into the next fiscal quarter. A heavy silence hung on the line. I happen to have a lunch meeting near your office on Monday, Wallace finally said. Perhaps we should sit down privately and discuss this structural element. I think that would be highly beneficial for both of us, Donovan agreed. Let's say noon. Noon is acceptable. Bring all the relevant documentation. Donovan ended the call with a satisfying click. He looked back down at the yellow legal pad, staring intently at the words $600,000. Oliver, Simon, and Gavin arrogantly thought they held all the cards. They thought they could casually humiliate him, completely deny him his meager $18,000, and continue to exploit his brilliance. But they were about to learn a very painful lesson about reading the fine print. Donovan turned off his monitor and finally allowed himself a genuine laugh. The midday sun beat down on the pavement outside the glass towers, casting long shadows across the plaza where Donovan arranged to meet Wallace. Donovan, a 55-year-old contracts analyst who spent his career navigating software agreements, felt an unusual calm. He pushed open the oak doors of the upscale steakhouse and spotted his friend in a corner booth. Wallace was a seasoned auditor for a compliance firm, a man whose professional existence revolved around finding flaws in corporate facades. Donovan, it has been too long, Wallace said, extending a firm hand. You look like a man carrying the weight of a $90 million secret. Donovan chuckled softly, devoid of humor. $90 million over 7 years to be precise. A denied raise of a mere $18,000 is what broke the camel's back. It is poetic how their greed blinds them to their own vulnerability. Wallace ordered 2 black coffees. I read the summaries you sent. The Apex Dynamics contract is a beast. The uptime milestone of 99.99% is impossible with their infrastructure. The volume of sensitive information, 14 terabytes of proprietary data sitting there, waiting to be mishandled. That 0.6% royalty clause is a ticking time bomb without strict compliance. They are not in compliance, Donovan whispered. Oliver, Simon, and Gavin run Aeroflux like their personal fiefdom. Oliver, the chief executive officer, is blinded by his reflection. Simon, our general counsel, rubber stamps whatever Oliver wants without a thought to legal ramifications. Gavin, the chief financial officer, only cares about juicing margins. They squeezed me out of a living while I ensured their Apex Dynamics deal did not implode. The arrogance of corporate leadership never ceases to amaze me, Wallace mused. What about human resources? Jason, was it? Did he offer resistance when they denied your request? Jason is another mindless pawn, Donovan replied bitterly. He tows the company line. He handed me the denial for the $18,000 with a hollow sympathetic smile. They think I am an obedient cog in their machine, an old man who will accept his miserable lot in life. They do not realize this cog knows how to dismantle their engine. Wallace leaned in, his expression serious. So, we proceed? The formal notice of audit regarding intellectual property compliance. Donovan nodded firmly. Yes, send it directly to Oliver. Make the language terrifyingly official. Cite the Apex Dynamics agreement. Mention the 14 terabytes of proprietary client data, and aggressively demand a comprehensive review of their procedures. Give them a strict 48-hour deadline to produce all compliance documentation. A 48-hour deadline, Wallace repeated, a predatory smile spreading. That will send a shockwave through the executive suite. They will panic immediately. And when executives panic, they make stupid mistakes. Exactly, Donovan agreed. They do not know the actual intricacies of the contract. They only know the $90 million that pads their portfolios. When they see a threat to that specific revenue stream, they will scramble. And because they are too lazy to understand the details, they will turn to the only person in the building who understands the paperwork. The rest of the lunch was spent ironing out the precise wording of the audit notice. By the time they parted ways, Donovan felt a surge of adrenaline he had not experienced in years. The trap was meticulously set. Back at the Aeroflux offices, the atmosphere was stifling. Donovan settled into his cubicle, the hum of fluorescent lights serving as the soundtrack to his waiting game. He did not wait long. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Wallace sent the email. Donovan knew the exact moment it landed in Oliver's inbox because less than 10 minutes later, an explosive email chain began circulating among the C-suite. Even from his vantage point, Donovan could smell the raw panic radiating from the corner offices above. Oliver forwarded the terrifying email to Simon with a panicked subject line demanding answers. Simon, out of his depth regarding the technical specifics of the 14 terabytes of data and the 0.6% royalty structure, panicked and forwarded it to Gavin. Gavin, ever the master of delegating work, did exactly what Donovan predicted. The forwarded email chain landed in Donovan's inbox with a deafening chime. It was sent from Gavin, with Oliver and Simon conspicuously copied. The message from Gavin was predictably frantic. Donovan, see the attached urgent notice from an external auditor regarding the Apex Dynamics deal. They are demanding a compliance report within a 48-hour deadline. Handle this mess immediately and tell us what they want. Keep us in the loop. Donovan stared at the monitor, a cold, satisfied smile touching his lips. They were blindly handing him the keys to their destruction. They were so incompetent, so disconnected from the operations of the company they led, that they were assigning the exact person who set the trap to investigate it. They were ignoring the glaring danger, oblivious to the fact that the call was coming from inside the house. With methodical precision, Donovan opened a secure folder on his personal drive. He dragged and dropped crucial files. The original Apex Dynamics contract, the damning internal memos from Simon disregarding compliance warnings, the arrogant financial projections from Gavin highlighting the $90 million and the 0.6% margin, proving they knew how much illicit profit was at stake. He was quietly building his whistleblower file. He documented every instance of corporate negligence, every ignored warning about failing to meet the critical uptime milestone of 99.99%, and every dangerous corner cut in handling the 14 terabytes of client data. The payout he was aiming for was $600,000, the legally mandated whistleblower reward that would serve as his severance package, his early retirement fund, and his glorious revenge. As the late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across his desk, Donovan worked in focused silence. The arrogant executives were breathing a sigh of relief, foolishly thinking their diligent, 55-year-old analyst was expertly taking care of their nasty audit problem. They had no idea that the looming 48-hour deadline was not a window to fix their mistakes. It was the final, inescapable countdown to their catastrophic ruin. The merciless machine was in motion, and Donovan was the only one sitting at the controls. The 48-hour deadline expired in complete silence. Donovan sat at his desk, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, staring at the monitor. He had anticipated the arrogance of Oliver and his cohorts, yet witnessing their sheer hubris was still a marvel. They had chosen to ignore his final warning, likely assuming he was merely an aging analyst throwing a pathetic tantrum over an $18,000 raise. By noon, the inevitable consequences began to manifest. Apex Dynamics, having received Donovan's legally bulletproof notice regarding the breached clauses, systematically froze all impending transactions. Within minutes, the panicked shouts echoed down the polished corridors. Apex Dynamics had suspended the flow of their $90 million contract. The 99.99% uptime milestone was officially flagged as compromised, and the 14 terabytes of proprietary data were locked behind impenetrable legal injunctions. Later that afternoon, Donovan found himself inadvertently positioned near the glass-walled conference room. Inside, the executive trinity, Oliver, Simon, and Gavin, were pacing like cornered animals. Gavin, the chief financial officer, looked particularly ghastly. Standing nervously by the projector was Dylan, a junior analyst who had only been with the company for 6 months. Donovan adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the slightly ajar door, his ears picking up the frantic exchange. "We cannot report a freeze on a $90 million revenue stream this close to the quarterly earnings call," Gavin hissed. "The board will have our heads." "Then fix it, Gavin," Oliver barked. "Make the liability disappear until we can crush Donovan at Dylan. Go into the financial reporting system. Find the liability flag associated with the Apex royalty, the 0.6% payout clause that Donovan triggered. Delete that flag entirely. Wipe it from the current quarter's preliminary ledger." Dylan's eyes widened in sheer terror. "But sir, that is a direct violation of federal reporting standards. That flag represents a materialized financial obligation. Deleting it would be exactly what I am ordering you to do," Gavin roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table. "Do you want to have a career here, Dylan? Or do you want to be packing your desk in 10 minutes? Delete the flag now." Dylan swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he gathered his laptop. "Yes, sir." Donovan stepped back into the shadows as Dylan rushed out of the conference room, tears welling in the young man's eyes. Donovan followed the junior analyst to a quiet alcove near the break room. "Dylan," Donovan said softly, stepping into the alcove. The young man jumped, clutching his laptop to his chest. "Donovan, I didn't. I heard everything," Donovan said, his voice a calm, reassuring anchor in the boy's turbulent sea of panic. "Gavin just ordered you to commit financial fraud to cover up a $90 million disaster. If you do this, and the auditors find out, and they will, Gavin will throw you under the bus without a second thought. You will go to federal prison, Dylan. Not him, you." Dylan let out a choked sob. "What do I do? If I refuse, he will fire me." "Do exactly what he said," Donovan instructed, his eyes glinting with a cold, calculated light. "But before you delete the flag, take a screenshot of the system showing the liability. Then, draft an email to your personal account. Detail the exact time, the exact location, and the precise words Gavin used to order the deletion. Blind copy me on that email. You are going to create a paper trail that proves you acted under extreme duress and direct threat of termination. They are digging their own graves, Dylan. Do not let them pull you in with them." Dylan nodded frantically, wiping his eyes. Okay, I will do it. Thank you, Donovan." With the final piece of the puzzle securely in place, Donovan left the office right at 5 o'clock. He drove through the bustling city streets, the setting sun casting long, golden shadows across the pavement. He parked outside a sleek, modern office building and made his way to the top floor. Fiona, his attorney, was waiting for him in her expansive corner office. She was a formidable woman in her early 40s, possessing a mind like a steel trap and a reputation for dismantling corporate monoliths. "Donovan," Fiona greeted, gesturing for him to sit in the plush leather chair opposite her desk. "I trust the 48 hours have elapsed?" "They have," Donovan replied, taking a seat and resting his hands on his knees. Apex Dynamics has frozen the payments, and our friends at Aeroflux have reacted exactly as predicted. In fact, they have exceeded my expectations. He handed Fiona a thick manila folder. Inside were the printed copies of Dylan's email, the screenshots of the deleted liability flag, and a meticulously organized timeline of Jason and Simon's retaliatory actions over the past weeks. Fiona opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Financial fraud, directed by the chief financial officer, sanctioned by the chief executive officer, all to cover up a breach of contract that they themselves triggered by unlawfully denying a contractual raise. And we have the retaliation claim beautifully documented. The payout they owe me under the breach is $600,000, Donovan noted calmly. But I suspect the damages we can seek now are substantially higher. $600,000 is merely the appetizer, Donovan, Fiona said, closing the folder with a decisive snap. By ordering a subordinate to falsify financial records, Gavin has violated the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The retaliation you have faced from Jason and Simon violates federal whistleblower protections. When we file this, it will not just be a civil lawsuit. We will be handing the Securities and Exchange Commission a neatly wrapped criminal case. Donovan allowed himself a small, rare smile. So we are ready? We are more than ready, Fiona replied, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. By this time tomorrow, Oliver, Simon, and Gavin will be facing the total destruction of their careers, their company, and potentially their freedom. We are going to take everything from them. Donovan looked out the window at the darkening sky. 55 years old, denied an $18,000 raise, treated like an obsolete cog in a machine that ran on his expertise. They had tried to discard him. Instead, they had handed him the detonator to their entire empire. The atmosphere in the grand auditorium of Aeroflux was electric, buzzing with the manufactured enthusiasm typical of a quarterly all-hands meeting. Oliver stood at the podium, bathed in the harsh glare of the spotlight, his smile stretched thin over teeth that looked too perfect to be entirely real. He was in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech regarding the recent triumphant rollout of the new software platform for Apex Dynamics, a project that had consumed the lives of everyone in the room for the past 2 years. Donovan sat near the back, his posture relaxed, a stark contrast to the stiff, nervous energy radiating from his younger colleagues. At 55 years old, he had seen enough corporate theatrics to last a lifetime. He adjusted his glasses, his gaze fixed not on Oliver, but on the side entrance of the auditorium. The heavy oak doors were about to open, and with them, the carefully constructed facade of Oliver's reign would come crashing down. And so, Oliver boomed, his voice amplified to an unnatural volume. We celebrate this monumental achievement. The successful integration of 14 terabytes of legacy data and the achievement of our 99.99% uptime milestone is a testament to the dedication of every single person in this room. The applause was polite, driven more by obligation than genuine excitement. Donovan did not clap, he simply waited, right on cue. The side doors swung open with a resounding thud that echoed through the cavernous space. The sudden noise cut through the remaining applause like a knife. Heads turned in unison as 3 men in immaculately tailored suits marched down the aisle. Leading the trio was Wallace, a silver-haired attorney whose reputation for ruthlessness was legendary in corporate circles. Oliver frowned, his speech faltering. He leaned toward the microphone. "Excuse me, gentlemen, this is a private company meeting." Wallace ignored him, his pace steady and purposeful. He reached the foot of the stage and looked up at the CEO with an expression of mild amusement. "Oliver," Wallace said, his voice carrying effortlessly without the aid of a microphone, "I am here on behalf of my client to formally serve you and Aeroflux with a lawsuit for breach of contract, fraud, and intellectual property theft." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Simon, the general counsel, sprang from his seat in the front row, his face drained of color. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot just barge in here." Wallace calmly produced a thick stack of legal documents and placed them squarely on the edge of the stage. The documents outlined the specifics. But to summarize, the 0.6% royalty clause embedded in the Apex Dynamics contract, a contract projected to yield $90 million over 7 years, was executed under fraudulent pretenses. The intellectual property rights to the core algorithm were never fully transferred to Aeroflux, as they belonged to the original developer. Gavin, the chief financial officer, stood up, his face flushed with sudden panic. "That is impossible. Our legal department vetted every line of that contract. Perhaps your legal department should have paid closer attention to the assignment clauses," Wallace replied coolly. "Or perhaps they should have consulted the man who actually wrote them." Oliver's eyes darted frantically around the room until they finally landed on Donovan, who was slowly rising from his seat. The auditorium fell deathly silent as Donovan made his way down the aisle. Every eye was on the 55-year-old contracts analyst who had been invisible to the executive team just a few weeks prior. "Donovan?" Oliver croaked, the false bravado entirely gone from his voice. "What did you do?" Donovan stopped a few feet from Wallace. He looked at Oliver, then at Simon, and finally at Gavin. "I did exactly what I was hired to do," Donovan said, his voice calm and steady. "I protected the interests of the creator. When I asked for a meager raise of $18,000, you laughed at me. You told me my contributions were insignificant. You, Gavin, said I was replaceable." Gavin opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on dry land. "The core algorithm that makes the Apex Dynamics platform function," Donovan continued, addressing the silent auditorium, "was built on proprietary code that I developed independently, on my own time, long before I joined Aeroflux. When the company decided to incorporate it without my explicit permission, I simply ensured that the contract accurately reflected the true ownership." Simon sputtered, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "That is corporate espionage. You will go to prison for this." "Actually," Wallace interjected, tapping the stack of documents, "the initial employment contract Donovan signed explicitly excluded his prior intellectual property. Furthermore, the Apex Dynamics contract, which you all eagerly signed without a thorough secondary review, names Donovan as the sole beneficiary of the 0.6% royalty." The silence in the room was absolute. The weight of Wallace's words hung in the air, suffocating the executives. Oliver gripped the edges of the podium so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He looked at Jason, the human resources director, who was trying to shrink into his chair. "This is blackmail," Oliver whispered, though the microphone picked it up perfectly. "It is leverage," Donovan corrected him, "and I am willing to offer a settlement. My demands are simple and non-negotiable." Donovan took a step closer to the stage, ensuring that his next words would be heard by everyone. "First, an immediate lump sum payment of $600,000 to buy out my rights to the algorithm. Second, an immediate promotion to Director of Contract Analytics, complete with the corner office currently being used as a storage room. And finally, the immediate resignation of Gavin, effective as of this exact moment." Gavin let out a strangled cry. "You cannot be serious. Oliver, you cannot let him do this." Oliver looked at his chief financial officer, then at the stack of legal documents, and finally at the sea of faces watching the drama unfold. The calculation was brutal and instantaneous. A public lawsuit would tank their stock, destroy their relationship with Apex Dynamics, and likely result in criminal charges. The $90 million over 7 years was on the line. "Jason," Oliver said, his voice hollow and defeated, "please escort Gavin to his office to pack his belongings." Jason nodded frantically, rushing over to the sputtering executive and practically dragging him toward the exit. Oliver turned his gaze back to Donovan. The hatred in his eyes was palpable, but it was overshadowed by a crushing sense of defeat. "The payout will be wired to your account by the end of the day. Your new title is effective immediately." Donovan allowed himself a small, tight smile. He adjusted his glasses once more. "Thank you, Oliver. I look forward to our continued collaboration." As Donovan turned and walked back up the aisle, the silence finally broke, replaced by a low murmur of shock and awe. He had walked into the room as an underappreciated, underpaid analyst. He was walking out with $600,000, a corner office, and the satisfaction of a perfectly executed revenge. The $18,000 he had originally asked for seemed like a distant memory, a trivial sum that had cost the executives their pride, their power, and their peace of mind. Donovan knew the corporate game better than anyone, and today he had finally won.